back with a brand new year, and you probably have a new calendar that you've acquired for 2023. Now, a lot of times we might like to think that we live spur of the moment, but our calendars sometimes can rule our lives. And mine's no different, but today we're going to talk about how we can use our calendar for our garden. So another thing you probably are getting in the mail right now are a lot of seed and plant catalogs. It's always a fun time of year to get those colorful catalogs in the mail and start dreaming about our spring garden. And so today we're going to talk about how to use our calendar to figure out and plan for our spring garden. Now there's two things you got to consider first, and that's whether you're going to plant cool or warm season crops. Basically there's two different types of vegetables, cool and warm season. And so as the name implies, cool season crops are those vegetables that like to grow in cooler conditions. And so those are the ones that we can start planting sooner. Now warm season crops like to grow in warmer temperatures, and we'll talk about those in a minute here. So let's first look at cool season crops. So typically you can plant your cool season crops out in the garden anywhere from February 15th to March 15th. You have a bit of a window there. Now, some cool season crops you can directly sow straight out into the garden. So that means the seeds that you can get, such as lettuce, carrots, radishes, those can go straight out into the garden. So for right now, we're just going to go ahead and find those seeds and set them aside until we're ready to plant those out in the garden. And the thing you might want to think about is you might plant some maybe February, mid-February, late February, and then into March also. So you can kind of got some succession planting, and you never know in Oklahoma if we have a really bad winter storm, you still got that window to go ahead and replant some directly out in the garden. Now there are some other cool season crops that you are going to want to plant transplants out in the garden during that time period of mid-February to mid-March. And the reason why you want to plant transplants is because it gives those plants a faster start out in the garden so that we can actually get our produce off of them before our summer temperatures begin to warm up. And so some examples of those cool season crops that do best by transplants are broccoli, cauliflower, head lettuce. And what you're going to do on those is go ahead and start transplants. Now, you will find in nurseries, plant nurseries, that there's plenty of transplants available if you choose to just go ahead and go to the nursery and buy your transplants. By all means, that's a great option if you want to do that. For some people, however, you might want to consider growing your own transplants. Growing your own transplants offers you a more opportunity to grow different varieties because you can go online and order a lot of different seeds that maybe aren't available in your plant nurseries. Also, it allows you to kind of control the health of those plants, the size of those transplants by doing it yourself. The other big thing is it's just more economical because for a few dollars you can get several seeds, meaning several plants, versus a few dollars for one plant. So think about that as well. So if you want to start your own transplants, then we need to start thinking about those transplants sooner than your planting date. So that means we need to look at our calendar and back up a few weeks. Most of your cool season transplants need to be planted about 5 to 7 weeks prior to the date that they're going to be planted out in the garden. If our range is mid-February to mid-March, we need to look at our calendar and count backwards from the date we hope to plant the transplants outside. Let's assume we want to plant our cool season crop by March 15th. We will then count back 5 weeks from there, and you can see we need to sow our seeds by February 8th. If you're wanting to have your transplants growing earlier in the garden, say by February 15th, then you could start your transplants as soon as January 11th. So ideally, your range for starting your cool season crops transplants indoors would be from January 11th to February 8th. Now, of course, this is just a general range and it's a little bit flexible. And when you start your transplants indoors, there's a lot of factors to consider, including moisture and light and also heat. And so when you're starting those, all those factors can kind of play into the health of your transplants and how quickly they will germinate and grow for you. So there is some flexibility in that. And again, you can also start several sessions of transplants as well. So you could start some on January 18th and then start some later in February as well if you wanted to do that. So now let's talk about warm season crops. Well, when does cool season change to warm season? A general rule in Oklahoma is the date of April 15th. That's right, tax day. I always joke with people, go pay your taxes and then you can go play in the garden and start planting your peppers and tomatoes. But really, that date is just an average for our last freeze date in Oklahoma. So as we approach April 15th, you can start looking at that forecast and see whether there's any potential frost or freezes in the forecast. And it might be that you could plant a little sooner, or maybe you need to wait a little bit later. Obviously, this will vary a little bit depending on your specific location in Oklahoma. If you're further south, you could plant a little sooner. If you're further north, you might wait a little bit longer. So there is some variability in that date of April 15th as well. It is just a good date and an easy date to remember. So when we talk about April 15th, switching to warm season crops, that is the date that we can start planting our warm season vegetables outdoors. So that means tomatoes, peppers, and all of those great crops that we love to have in our garden. Now, again, just like cool season crops, there are warm season crops that you can directly sow out into the garden, such as your corn and your okra and things like that. So for those seeds, we're just going to set those aside and not worry about them until April. There are some warm season crops, however, that you want to go ahead and start growing your transplants for them as well if you're choosing to grow your own transplants. Now, the first ones that you want to consider growing are your eggplants and your peppers because they need the most amount of time, usually 6 to 8 weeks. So again, using our calendar, if we wanted to plant on April 15th, we would need to count back a minimum of 6 weeks and find that we can sow our seeds indoors by March 4th. However, you can sow those seeds as soon as February 18th as well. Now, tomatoes is the next big warm season crop that needs to be planted outdoors as a transplant. And in order to grow those transplants, they need 5 to 7 weeks. So the window for starting tomato plants would be February 25th through March 11th. And really, you want to plant some of your warm season crops as transplants for the same reason that you're planting some of your cool season crops as transplants, and that's to give them a head start. So if we were to plant tomatoes as seeds directly out into the garden on February 15th, what's going to happen is they probably would germinate and grow for you, but by the time they get large enough to actually flower and start producing, our summer temperatures are going to be too hot, and that would really reduce your produce that you're going to get off of it. So you probably have had a rogue tomato that might have done that in your compost pile or your previous tomato garden area. But that's really why, if you're looking at starting tomatoes, peppers, or eggplants, you want to start those with transplants on April 15th. Whether you start those transplants yourself or again, go to the nursery. They often have several transplants available. Now, be forewarned though a little bit. You will find that those transplants are for sale at your local nursery well in advance of that April 15th. So again, keeping in mind whether your forecast allows you to plant a little bit sooner or your location further south might allow you to plant a little bit sooner. But sometimes they're out there way too soon and you really shouldn't be planting them just yet. So be mindful of your forecast and also what you're planting in your garden, and use your calendar to figure out when to get those transplants started.
We hope you enjoyed this video as part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on the OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.